to do. I only hope for your sake that you really see it. And when you get to the Grand Canyon, Abbott, do me a favor. You go right out to the ledge.
Yeah.
You go right out, walk out to the ledge.
Yes.
But whatever you do, be careful you don't fall down. It's 15,000 feet deep.
Ooh.
But if you should happen to fall off, Abbott, and you fall down, on your way down, as you're falling, if you got the time, make sure you look to the left, because that's a sight you will never see again.
Get out of here.
After the break, a challenging drama documentary, Pictures in the Mind, which looks at the horrific illiteracy level and isolation caused by the effective banning of sign language in deaf education.
It's her first wedding, but not the dresses, because it was hired from Janice Smith's bridal hire shop.
The things that happened to my bridal gowns, like mud on the hem, even Beaujolais down the front. Then it all comes back to me. Unless I can get the dress totally clean, I can't hire it out again. My bridal gowns have to be washed in low temperatures. But at low temperatures, my old powder often let me down, until I changed to Ariel Automatic.
See what happens when we compare Janice's old powder with Ariel. It's the difference between nearly clean and really clean.
After an Ariel wash, it's so clean it sparkles, and the bride feels she's the first girl ever to wear the dress. Now you know why I couldn't run my business without Ariel Automatic.
Ariel, not just nearly clean, but really clean.
New Solvite expanding filler for all big gaps inside and out. You'll find Decorate, Dickens, Levi's and other leading DIY stores and departments are full of it.
Now on Channel 4, a drama documentary about a century-old battle concerning sign language for the deaf. It's the first drama documentary ever made in this country with deaf actors using sign language, using pictures in the mind.
Oh? Are you deaf?
Yeah.
Ah, I thought so. When you came up to help me earlier on, I realized then that you were deaf. Okay. Do you like magic?
Yeah.
You do? Can you do any tricks?
A few.
Uh-huh. Do you do any shows?
Sometimes. Not many.
Hmm. Do you rehearse much? Rehearse. You know, rehearse. Can you sign?
Oh, not much.
Hang on a second. Okay, look. You see? No. You go to school. School, you know. Writing, reading, school.
Oh, I did. I just left. Teachers talking. Didn't understand.
You know, you're not the only one. There are many other deaf people just the same.
Hey, watch this.
What?
Hold on. Now, look.
Well done, that's very good. Yeah, that's good.
Cheers. How did you get started in magic?
Oh, well. Oh, it's a long story. It goes back a long way. Now, let me see. I'll try to explain it. Oh, I know, yes. Hang on. Right. Right. Now then, all of these cards are like you and me and all of those people out there. A group of people, but they're all different. Okay, they're not the same. Now, put them together like this, and they all fit together perfectly. Now watch. You see this card? That's me. On the surface, it doesn't look any different from the rest. They're all the same. Okay? Now watch.
Who's he?
Oh, he's a figure from my past. From our past. Sometimes he follows me. But don't worry about him, look. Right, I'm in here. Now, watch. Watch. You see? When you put the pressure on, out I come.
So what are you saying?
Well, I tried to be like other people, like hearing people. At school, I was educated to ignore my deafness, to try and be like a hearing person, to talk like a hearing person. And all my life, I've pretended to understand when people talk to me, you know. But it doesn't work. Look, try to find my place, but it's difficult to fit in. You see? When the pressure's on, it's obvious that I'm different. I'm the odd one out. There you are. I'm the joker in the pack.
Oh, I get it.
Right. So, I thought about it for a while, and then decided, why not be me? Be myself? Why not accept my difference? You know, I'm not a hearing person. So I turned it round. And instead of being an abnormal hearing person, I thought it would be better if I was a normal deaf person. Part of a normal deaf community.
Oh, I see.
Right, and face up to the world with confidence. Okay?
Oh, yeah, I get it.
Right. Now, this is our community we talked about. Okay? And now I belong. I can be me. I have an identity. I have my pride. Watch this. There, you see? No difference.
But I am. I can't read. I can't write.
Well,
Who is he?
Do you really want to know why you can't read, you can't write? Why you can't communicate, do you?
Of course.
Right. Then we'll follow him. Come on.
Don't be alarmed. I have brought you here because I have a story to tell. Our story, the history of deaf people, has been hidden for many years, buried here underground.
Why?
Well, it's not easy to explain, but let me try. All of us here speak a language with our hands. A visual language, a language of sign. But it has no text, and therefore no books. So it is stored here in images, and these images are our text. Here we can summon up those images. Images of the past, yours and mine as we grew up. Look. You can see for yourself. You're thirsty for knowledge. Yet you, like 9 out of 10 deaf people, are illiterate.
But I'm not stupid.
Hang on. Just look.
The speech therapist come in, and he was rather shocked how bad David was, profoundly deaf, how little speech he had, and his first thing, if you want this child to talk, you won't be able to do use signs. Now, a child of 3 you're not going to communicate with is very, very difficult. He's saying, you read my lips, and he's going to see you moving your lips to words he's never heard in his life. He's not going to understand a thing. It just causes frustration. Well, the whole thing was getting very frustrated. And the recommendation from the speech therapist, I would get this child sent away.
I managed to start David at a nursery school when he was about 3.5 years old. And the visiting doctor one day, she said, you know, how do you communicate with your child? I said, well, He has a speech therapist coming in once a week. I said, we're not doing very well. I said, but she said, do you use any signs? I said, well, we did have signs that we made up between us, but these are taboo. We're not to do these. And she said, nonsense. She said, you are to communicate with that child in any way you know how. It's so important that you have total communication.
David started school at 4 years old at Eston. But once again, we come up to the same thing again. There was no signing at the time. It was an oral school where there was deaf and partially deaf children. And so it was lip reading and sounds again.
So you grow older, cocooned in a bubble of total silence. You live in a world of just images to people your dreams. You are like me. For as long as I was living apart from other deaf people, I used only isolated, scattered, unconnected signs. I did not know the art of combining them to form distinct patterns, which could become a language which could be communicated to other people.
On the whole, the biggest loss to David is his lack of reading. And, you know, I'd say to anybody with a deaf child, don't worry about anything else, but if they can learn to read. And every time we've gone to the school, we say, we don't care if he never plays football or does anything, please teach him to read.
Your parents did their best. They tried hard. But you have been the victim of a system of incompetence and neglect. Now let's start with my story.
Do you know this man?
Yes, he's one of us. He's deaf. He was born over 200 years ago, and his name is Jean Massieu.
Enchanté. Let me show you something. That is me. I was born near the town of Bordeaux in France. Exactly 200 years ago today, I was moved from my family home to the deaf school in Bordeaux. Having spent my whole life as a shepherd, I was like you, David. All my ideas, all my concepts were confined to the circle of objects that I could actually see and touch, and that was all. I had the habits of an animal. I was startled and frightened by everything. When I was moved to Bordeaux, I felt very proud because I thought that I'd been promoted to be in charge of a bigger flock of sheep. The headmaster of the school was called Abbé Sicard. He was exceptional. He had learnt to sign. I was astonished. I never thought I'd see a hearing person signing.
One must know words before one can lip read them. Learning from the face is as impossible as understanding what I'm saying now. But this is immediately clear. The natural language of the body. Massieu walks across the room and he sees me. What's the sign for this?
Knife.
Uh-huh. You watch me now.
If hearing people speak, it means nothing to us. Deaf people don't understand it. Hearing people think in words. Deaf people have ideas too, but they're mental pictures. But how can deaf people connect those pictures to words? That's the problem. Abbé Sicard and I worked together trying to translate the signs into words so that even if I didn't understand speech, I might be able to read and write.
You remember that?
I'll remember.
Where's the knife?
Well, there. Or there?
Watch. The picture and the written word and the object, all three, they are the same.
The same?
Uh-huh. Watch. K. N. I.
Now, this might look simple, but for deaf people it's a real problem. K-N-I-F-E. What's that? There's no picture, there's no meaning. Now, if deaf people were to get together, to have ideas and discuss what sign could match those ideas, once we decide, then those signs will spread. In the same way that hearing people discuss words. They say, what's the word for that? Once a decision is made, then those words spread. But deaf people's visual symbols and hearing people's spoken and written symbols are worlds apart.
These are the same.
The same?
Watch now. What's the sign for this?
Plate.
Uh-huh.
Try to imagine my dismay. K-N-I-F-E, I'd learnt that. But there was more. A, B, all sorts of letters. I was going to have to learn to put them all in the right order. After a few days, I could write simple words. After a few months, I could write simple sentences. And in 2 years, I was writing fairly well.
200 years ago?
That's right.
You had a good teacher. But I didn't. Why?
Be patient. I'll explain. First, my teacher knew the importance of good communication. To increase my knowledge, it was necessary to be able to explain things to me in my own language, the language of sign. Second, we had then to develop a vocabulary of signs. Sign language was to develop hand in hand with the acquisition of knowledge. But, and this is most important, the new signs had to be true to our sign language. Often, Sikar and I would go for walks outside. We would look at trees and I'd ask him the names of them, or he would ask me the signs for flowers. We were educating each other.
What's the sign for that?
For this, maybe berry?
S-T-R-A-W-B-E-R-R-I-E-S.
Well, what's the sign?
Straw. Berry.
No. We must find better signs than that.
Oh, you're right.
You and I agree we want new signs, but not like that. What's the sign for U-N-D-E-R-S-T-A-N-D?
Oh, it's this.
Correct. It's not under and then stand.
Oh, no.
You see, we want new signs to develop that are genuinely visual. and not copies from speech. We must both agree on signs that have their own rules and an order completely their own, and not imitate spoken language, right?
When we invent a sign, I think we must include a description of the size and the texture.
And the taste as well.
Yes.
In fact, everything.
Interesting, eh? Now it's many years later. Monsieur has learned to read and write. He and Sika have perfected their method of communication. And Monsieur has become a teacher of the deaf. In fact, he's the first deaf person to become a teacher. The system of deaf education that they have devised together has spread throughout the world. Hundreds of schools for the deaf opened up, and signing was recognized as the first language of the deaf. Through the use of sign, their education flourished. Literacy rates soared, and deaf people became architects, lawyers, artists, politicians, journalists, and so on. However, Sika's very success sowed the seeds of his system's downfall. If these children were capable of education, so too, many hearing experts argued, must they be capable of speech. Wealthy hearing parents set up their own private schools, whose main aim was to teach children to speak like them. Oral education started. A belief that by constant imitation and repetition, a deaf child would acquire the ability to speak words, then sentences, and then learn to read. Oralism made a crucial mistake here, for it confused speech and language. In fact, the oralists soon demanded that signing, the natural language of the deaf, be banned completely.
There are lots of ways to help keep your skin looking beautiful, if you've got the money, the courage, and plenty of time. But Camay's one little beauty treatment you should use every day, whatever else you do. It's made from pure, natural oils to give a lather so rich and creamy, you'd think it came from a jar. Camay, the everyday way to beautiful skin.
Gonna want it, gonna want it, gonna want it, gonna want it.
Flying visit, you're not stopping. Grab a sandwich, body popping.
The way we're living today, still gonna want bottle.
Fresh,
Bottle, gonna want it. Bottle,
natural.
bottle, gonna want it. Bottle, gonna want it. Bottle, gonna want it.
I'm not a dentist, but I recognize this. The tool dentists use to scrape away tartar. Recognize this? Crest in the silver box. A fluoride toothpaste that actively helps stop tartar from coming back. Look, hard, ugly tartar has to be scraped away. But now you can help keep your teeth tartar-free. So more of this could mean less of this. Tartar Control Crest not only fights fillings, it helps keep teeth tartar-free.
Ta-da! Well, it's not every day I treat myself to the best.
Oh, Sarah, I wouldn't say that.
Well, there are exceptions. Nescafe is simply unique. Precisely.
True, only Nescafe has that special blend and roast. For that richer, smoother taste.
There's no mistaking quality.
Yep, that Nescafe taste is in a class of its own.
Nescafe, coffee at its best.
The Engelbert Humperdinck Collection. 18 of his greatest hits, from Release Me and The Way It Used to Be to The Last Waltz. And There Goes My Everything. Get the inimitable voice of Engelbert Humperdinck on the Engelbert Humperdinck Collection. On album, cassette and compact disc from Telstar.
During my lifetime, I saw the systems Sika and I built up almost destroyed. The events recorded verbatim in this book explain what happened.
By 1880, the oralists were in a powerful enough position to convene their own international congress. Now, for the chairman and the delegates, the aim was clear.
Who would dare say that their disconnected and crude signs that mechanically reproduce objects and actions are the elements of a language? They're not. This fantastic language of signs, this ham-fisted cryptology, merely exalts the senses and ferments the passions. Even in the confessional, when the deaf-mute recounts his sins by signs, the sensations accompanying the act are reawakened. Ils sont renés. That's French. The detestable passions return to the sinner, which certainly in no way ameliorates his moral reform. It is a dangerous pantomime.
That was the chairman. The proceedings of this conference were deliberately designed to be a sustained attack upon the use of sign language. The delegates, who were all oralists, knew they had a vast majority at the conference. They had, after all, excluded all deaf teachers and all the opponents of oralism, with the exception of one person, just one, an American. And his name was Thomas Gallaudet.
Oral instruction is expensive. It succeeds only with the partially hearing. Its product is unnatural sounding speech. It slows mental culture. Speech should merely be an ancillary skill, not the main aim. The main aim should be education. Thank you for your paper, Mr. Gallaudet. We will see that it is printed. Now let us consider what constitutes the pure oral method. Its principles are simple and inflexible. It says that you are to look on your deaf child from the first as a hearing child.
What is the natural way of educating a deaf child?
The natural way of educating a hearing child is the natural way of educating a deaf child. Now let us consider what is the most effective method and means by which to help the pupil acquire a knowledge of language and speech. Well, let us waste no more time on language teaching methods, but go on to the wider parameters of education. Should pupils generally write on black canvas or on slate? Mr. Kay.
Mr. Chairman, turning to the subject of health, I have noticed that whereas chilblains were common to all the inmates of the Glasgow Institution during the winter, now they only attack those who are being taught by the silent system.
Yes, Dr. Buxton.
I have observed that those taught by the silent method are especially prone to diseases of the scalp, to a discharge from the ear, giving rise to a particularly offensive odor so noticeable in their classrooms. They are flat-chested, narrow-shouldered, with imperfectly expanded lungs, which I attribute to the silent method.
Thank you, Doctor.
And many who show none of these defects grow up to be stunted and feeble and die in early manhood of consumption or some other deteriorative disorder.
Mr. Bentley, these silent deaf are now led as a consequence of existing customs and of the circumstances of their education to associate with each other and in later life to mate with each other. Gentlemen, the consequences of such unions must have its effect in a very marked manner upon the number of deaf in the future. We must advocate that system of teaching and training the deaf which separates them, not congregates them. So, considering the unarguable superiority of speech over signs for restoring deaf mutes to social life and for giving them greater facility in language, this Congress resolves unanimously that henceforth the only method which which will lead the deaf to the Elysium fields of dignified, articulate speech is the pure oral method.
Is that true?
Yes. Do you know where those quotes came from? Well, I'll show you. From this book. That was published in 1880. It's an exact transcript from that conference in Milan. And what you saw were quotes from the book. Now, you remember seeing the American, Mr. Gallaudet, earlier. He made the first speech. Well, that's not included in there. It was left out. And his worst predictions came true. Parroting of speech became the main aim of oral schools. And, as he predicted, education became a secondary issue. Sign language was banned. And with its abolition, all deaf teachers were either dismissed or pensioned off. Now, watch.
Swim, swim, good girl. What is it? Fish. What? Bit more. Fish.
What did you do with the ticket, Diane? I gave the ticket to the man. Level crossing.
Children whose natural instincts were to use sign language to communicate in the classroom were made to sit on their hands. The language which would have provided the intellectual stimulus to make sense of the world was denied them. These sequences from films made in the 1950s give a vivid picture of the hours of parroting that deaf children had to endure. Educational progress was sacrificed, and for what result? Of these children, only 1 in 10 will ever speak intelligibly.
Only one?
Yes, I'm afraid so. Oralists see deaf children as defective, even subnormal. Now, that means that if you see deaf children this way, even one solitary success would make teachers feel proud of themselves.
What about us other 9?
That's exactly what the films don't ask.
So what are films for?
Well, they are for parents who are desperate for their children to speak. The fact is, parents and other people see deafness as an illness that can only be cured by speech.
So I'm not a deaf person. I'm ill. I'm a problem.
Exactly. Now look.
Emma has a problem. She's deaf.
The few children that have been taken away from their families and have been brought up by animals, gazelle children or wolf children, there are not many of them, but when they have been regained by society, none of them have ever been able to learn how to speak. And this is because they had not heard any speech at all, any human speech, in the early years of their lives. The same applies to the child who is born deaf. Because he has never heard speech, he cannot speak. And so he is left in the world with a really double handicap in communication with its environment. First of all, he is not only unable to understand what people want of it, but he also cannot express his own emotions, cannot tell the people around him what he wants, other than by signs, and this, of course, isn't adequate at all.
The doctor's talking about it from a medical point of view. He strongly believes in oralism and not using facial expression as the deaf prefer. He disapproves of sign language and says it's not enough for deaf people to express themselves. Look at me. I'm expressing myself through sign language now. The doctor seems to think deaf people are sick. The same as in history with those people at the Milan Congress.
It is an obtuse angle. Say it again. An obtuse. Obtuse angle. What is this? It is smaller than the right angle. That is an acute angle. Now, let's say them all again.
Looking at this film now, I can see it doesn't give the real story, learning without any real effort like the film makes it out to be. It wasn't like that. It really was an enormous strain with so much information going over my head. A terrific strain. I find it's a lot of waste spending so much time repeating the same English words over and over again. Where was my education?
Was that you?
Yes, it was ages ago, when I was little, when I was 11 years old. I brought it here to show to you because for the last 100 years, deaf education has concentrated on speech, really concentrated. I think that's okay for the partially hearing because they can hear a bit, but it's no use for the profoundly deaf. Our situation's impossible. We've got enormous problems. You know, all over the country, there are all schools who've got profoundly deaf children and they're not allowed to use sign language. Please watch.
Marcelia, can you try a purple car? A purple car. Good girl, we'll put that one there as well. What's this? It's a blue bus. Ian, try a blue bus. A blue bus. Well done. He's right, wasn't he?
It's supposed to be based on an ability to lip read, but if you watch, that's not what's happening. It's a method that relies on amplified sound, so those who can hear a little can understand.
Are we ready for listening? Carolyn, will it be a blue bus or a green and yellow lorry? Ready? A blue bus.
A blue bus.
Oh, that's very good. And now, Marcelia, a blue bus. Do you want to listen again? Listen hard. Perhaps it will be a blue bus, or perhaps a green and yellow lorry. Ready? A blue bus. Careful, careful. That one's got lots of little pieces. A green and yellow lorry. Oh, what a lot. That's only got two. A blue bus. Listen hard. Don't tell her, will you? A blue bus.
Baby,
She nearly right. What was it?
Blue bus.
It's a blue bus. Lorna. What was your horse's name? Yes, you turned round, yes. Everybody did. Everybody turned round. But what was your horse's name?
Oh,
You turned round, but what was the horse's name? Can you remember? You've forgotten.
You haven't.
Oh.
No. Can anybody remember? Wasn't
Lorna and Marcelia aren't failing because they don't know the answer. They're failing because they can't hear the question. Failure is nothing to do with their own efforts or their intellectual ability. These children are failing because the educational system refuses to communicate with them in a language they can understand.
back to the horse, and then what? And then...
Listen again. Did the boys hear the car?
No.
Louise says no, and I say no. They didn't hear the car. Have a look in your book, please. Have a look in your book. Look at page 3. Look at page 3. What were the boys doing? What were the boys doing?
The result of this method of teaching is that 9 out of 10 deaf people can't read a newspaper. The reading age of deaf school leavers is about 8 3/4. I really understand how those children feel. I was just the same. When I was a child, I had a language inside my head, but I couldn't express it. I was exactly the same as them.
Yeah, I thought that something was being built up inside of me. So I just thought, oh, sod it.
Yes, yeah, me too. What my film didn't show were all my anger, all my frustration.
Yeah, and everybody thought I was stupid. I'm not really. I'm not thick. I'm not stupid. Oh, it makes me mad.
Oh, yeah, me too.
It's interesting to see what your teachers used as an excuse for their failure. Now, here's one of your school reports. I'm quoting. I am rather concerned about his recent negative attitude to wearing his hearing aids and insist that these must be worn in school. And here's another piece. He must wear his hearing aids at all times and try to join in more with other members of his form.
I think it was a way of protesting. I'm completely deaf. I can't hear a thing.
Yes, but that protest gave your teachers the perfect excuse. They were saying, if he doesn't wear his hearing aid, how can we teach him? The result was you were trapped.
Last year I went to a deaf club, and for the first time I saw sign language used and was able to communicate easily.
Exactly. Now watch this.
What's that? Baby. Yes, a baby. What baby? Curly hair. Baby's got curly hair. Who's got curly hair? Dolly, my Dolly. Julie. Julie? Where is she? At home. Oh, she's at home.
This profoundly deaf child has normal language development because she's been exposed to a communication system that's natural for her. She has the same vocabulary as any child her own age. Her parents, who are deaf, have understood what oralists never seem to. Quite simply, that a child's basic language structure is acquired during the critical learning period, from 6 months to 4 years old. If it hasn't developed by the age of 4, it's almost impossible for it to do so.
What's that? A rabbit, yes, a rabbit. And that? Something to eat. It's an orange carrot. Yes, that's right. What's that? A duck. Yes, a duck. What's that? A cow. Yes, a cow. Milk.
Unlike you, David, that child is lucky. She won't have 17 years of catching up to do, because someone thought it was more important for the child to be taught to say the word mummy than develop naturally inside her own language. Now, imagine the same child 5 years later at the age of 7. You watch.
Swimming with flippers and a mask and keeping watch. The boy with red hair grabbed it, and Carl and I grabbed it. Jane was frightened. She thought it was a shark or a crab.
Thought it was a shark.
I grabbed it, and I'm being a crab. And Carl, he's pretending he's a shark. He's got a new aqualung set, so he can dive and swim under the water.
Okay, I'll write a little bit about Carl for you, shall I? So Carl pretended to be a shark.
A crab. I'm a crab. He's pretending to be a crab, aren't you? Pretend to be a crab. I've got goggles.
This is a total communication school. Speech and signing combined. But where the emphasis is based upon the deaf child's natural instinct, which is to sign. But such has been the resistance to this form of education that in Britain only a handful of such schools exist.
When Charles jumps in, he holds his nose. No, my sister and Daddy. Oh, his sister and Daddy. Jane and Daddy. No. When I jumped in, I was grabbed by my daddy, and Carl grabbed Jane.
Now, these children learn more quickly and do better at comprehension. So they're receiving a real education. Not just parroting, but a real taking in and a real understanding. And because of that, they also do better at lip reading and speech development, because these skills evolve naturally from an understanding of the world and of normal exchanges. That's why they've got better lip reading and better speech.
He's right. Lip reading is 90% guesswork. It's like grasping at language. But these children, they understand language because they have a language structure. So of course they do much better at lip reading and speech.
Hold on. Why aren't all schools like this?
Ah. Now, a brief political lesson. Watch this.
After 1880, the way to remove deaf and signing teachers was to control their training. The University of Manchester trains 50% of teachers of the deaf. And Manchester's syllabus is oral. Great play is made of the use of technology. Very useful for the partially hearing, but of little use for the profoundly deaf. None of these teachers are born deaf, none are taught sign language. It's not part of their training. And Manchester's influence is very powerful worldwide. The Journal of the British Association of Teachers of the Deaf is dominated by contributors associated with or from Manchester University, and its prejudice is clear. In the last 4 years, it has published 127 articles about the oral method, and only 3 about total communication and signing. It's not surprising, David, that none of your teachers could communicate with you, and they were obsessed by your useless hearing aid. After all, they had all been trained to believe that technology would teach you to speak, and if it failed with you, then whose fault was it? Yours. Teachers have low expectations of the deaf now, because for 100 years, millions of deaf children all over the world have been failing. In that 100 years, there have been no born deaf teachers. So, teachers now don't know what deaf people really can achieve. Recently, there have been a few people who don't just see the deaf as a medical problem. They've found what Sikar and I knew, that deaf people have a proper language and culture of their own. They want the public to accept the deaf as a linguistic minority. Now it all becomes interesting. Why? Because hearing people have been frightened of sign language and have been suppressing it. But they also suppress other spoken languages. Does that surprise you? In my own country, France, we have another language called Breton. Frenchmen have been trying to suppress and wipe out the Breton language. The same here in England. They've been trying to suppress and wipe out Welsh and Scottish. And it's the same all over the world. Languages are in conflict with each other through fear or through a desire to subjugate the other languages. So, deaf people must come together and fight for our language, just the same as for any other language. David, don't look so sad. It's better that you should know all these things, or you'll be like most deaf people, going through life believing that your problems were due to you being stupid, when in fact, your life has been shaped by the stupidity of those in charge of your education.
I don't understand what you say. But what do I do?
Well, whether this knowledge will embitter you or give you the determination that you need to go forward, I can't tell.
So you can see the past, but you can't see the future?
No, I'm afraid not, David.
Hey, come on. I think we should be going.
David, don't be depressed. Your real education has only just begun.
Yeah.
Come on.
Bye. Hold on. I want to go back.
Why?
Don't worry, it's just for a moment.
Oh, okay. But he's asleep.
Yes, but look, even he forgets.
Forgets what?
I'll show you.
Why did you do that?
So he can dream, of course.
There are lots of ways to help keep your skin looking beautiful. If you've got the money, the courage, and plenty of time. But Camay's one little beauty treatment you should use every day, whatever else you do. It's made from pure, natural oils to give a lather so rich and creamy, you'd think it came from a jar. Camay, the everyday way to beautiful skin.
Gonna want it, gonna want it, gonna want it, gonna want it.
Body active, body passive, body slim and body massive.
The way we're living today, still gonna want bottle.
Whole milk.
Bottle.
Skimmed milk.
Bottle.
Semi-skimmed.
Bottle. Gonna want bottle. Gonna want bottle. Gonna want.
Ta-da! Well, it's not every day I treat myself to the best.
Oh, Sarah, I wouldn't say that.
Well, there are exceptions. Nescafe is simply unique. Precisely.
True, only Nescafe has that special blend and roast. For that richer, smoother taste.
There's no mistaking quality.
Yep, that Nescafe taste is in a class of its own.
Nescafe, coffee at its best.
Why have cotton when you can have silk?
Burkatex,
Makes beautiful brides.
lined with lace.
A pretty face.
Burkatex.
Makes beautiful brides.
Burkatex makes beautiful brides at the Metro Centre Gateshead and Lance Lane, Leeds.
On ITV shortly, you can watch Julian Pettifer, watching you, watching us. On the other hand, you can stay here and watch Channel 4 News from the studios at ITN, presented tonight by Peter Sissons with Christabel King. And it's 7 o'clock.
Hello, good evening. The first of the Prime Minister's election options nears its deadline, and the latest snapshot of public opinion shows how tempted she must be. We have the figures polled by Murray, and to be published in tomorrow's Times, from key marginals. They confirm an alliance surge, but at the expense of Labour rather than the Tories. It may not be May the 7th, but can Mrs Thatcher afford to let this opportunity slip past June? Britain's top election specialist, David Butler, helps us to assess the significance of the latest symptoms of election fever. But we report too on a major policy hangover for the government. Has Westland Helicopters still not exhausted its capacity to inflict political damage? Also tonight, the Union Jack carried on the world's finest car, but has the minister got anything more to impress the Japanese? It should be pulled upright tomorrow. A Belgian report has new evidence on its last 5 minutes. It's a cancer that kills more women than cervical cancer. This new scanning technique could save them. And, alas, Brecht and Jones. Can they get the message out of Arturo Ui? But first, a new opinion poll out tomorrow calculates that the Conservatives could win an absolute majority approaching 100 if they called an immediate general election. The poll is bound to increase pressure on Mrs Thatcher to go for an early election, if not next month, then in June. The poll, to be published in tomorrow's Times, has been conducted in the key marginal seats, where the next election could be won or lost. It shows a Tory majority of 92 seats is possible, against their present majority of 136. The national polls suggest the Tories are 6 to 8 points clear, not quite enough for party leaders to be sure of a third straight term. Tomorrow's polls show a pattern of potentially big alliance gains in the marginals, but at the expense of Labour, which is effectively splitting the Tories' opposition. Our political correspondent Eleanor Goodman reports on the Times poll and how it could influence Tory election strategy.
The Prime Minister usually meets members of her strategy committee on Monday mornings to discuss election tactics. But today, as if to demonstrate her lack of interest in the subject, she met the Prime Minister of Pakistan instead. The election team did meet later, but her aides insisted that at no point, either today or in the last few weeks, has even the possibility of an election on May the 7th been discussed. Nor, it was insisted, was there any significance in the fact that Mrs. Thatcher had delayed her weekly audience with the Queen from Tuesday to Wednesday. At Westminster, the government whips were putting the same message round. May the 7th was out, but all other options remained open. Tomorrow's Mori poll of marginal seats in the Times, though, is likely to increase the pressure for an early election. In the 73 seats where Labour is the threat to the Tories, it puts the Conservatives down 3 points at 37%, Labour down 5 at 31%, and the Alliance up 8 to 30%. In the 22 seats where the Alliance is a threat to the Tories, Labour has been squeezed even further. The Conservative support has held steady at 38%, but Labour's share has fallen by 8 to 22%. Its loss has been entirely the Alliance's gain. It has moved up to just behind the Tories at 37%. That's very bad for Labour, and good news not just for the Alliance, but also for the Tories, as it suggests their opposition is almost as split as it was in 1983, and would give Mrs. Thatcher a majority of 92.
The drop in the support for Labour since Mr. Kinnock's Washington visit, and the rise in the Alliance after the spectacular success of Rosie Barnes in Greenwich, has combined to put the opposition parties in absolute level pegging position, 29-30, 39-30-29, or 29-29 as we found on Sunday. And that combination gives the Conservative Party the best shot at a solid working majority.
So do you think all the pressure is on her to go early?
If I were her, I'd go.
But Mrs. Thatcher apparently doesn't want to. She may be more influenced by other polls which give her a smaller lead. This morning's Daily Express Marplan poll, which was carried out after she returned from Moscow, put the Conservatives at 39%, Labour last with 29%, and the Alliance second with 30%. That would translate into an overall majority of 22%, which means that over 100 Tories could lose their seats. Taken together, the polls suggest that the effect of Mrs. Thatcher's trip to Moscow may not be that great. Moscow hasn't made that much difference?
Hasn't made that much difference to the voting intention. And the suggestion is, therefore, that the Tories at about 41 are bumping up against their ceiling, that there's a 60 or 59 or 58% anti-Tory vote that's switching around between the Alliance and Labour.
And is that 40-41% enough?
It could be, if they are, as they are at the moment, level pegging, if the opposition parties are level pegging at 29 each.
It was David Owen who got the May hare running at the weekend with his confident claim that Central Office was gearing up to announce an election tomorrow. This morning at a press conference to launch the Alliance health policy, he was clearly delighted by all the attention his prediction had attracted, but he had to admit it had been wrong.
I think I'll settle for getting the Grand National winner. It was clear that they were ready to hold an election, and it was clear that they looked at the options very seriously and were not probably made a final decision until last night, because there were confusing and conflicting signals given by the government.
If May is ruled out, that leaves June very much an option, possibly the 11th. By then, the budget tax cuts will be starting to show up in pay packets. Most of the major pieces of legislation in the Queen's speech would be through, and crucially, it would also allow the Conservatives to analyse the local election results. If they're disappointing for the Tories, she could, of course, wait until October, when the government has the advantage of being able to manage news during the long summer recess. Unemployment should also be below 3 million by then. But against that, other economic indicators might look less good, and Labour might have recovered. Of course, she could wait until 1988, which would guarantee that she broke another record for length of service, but that would risk throwing away her lead. For all Prime Ministers, the choice of election dates is one of the most important decisions they take. Mrs Thatcher could, of course, remove some of the uncertainty now by following Alec Douglas-Hume's example, by saying now that she isn't going to have a spring election. But Mrs Thatcher apparently believes there were special circumstances in 1966 and is not going to give away her ace card by restricting her options. 4 years later, Harold Wilson showed the dangers of going too soon. At the start of the 1970 campaign, Labour, which had been trailing the Tories for the previous year, was 5.5% ahead in the polls. But in the campaign, he saw that lead drop away to eventual defeat. But at the moment, Mrs Thatcher is probably most conscious of Jim Callaghan's example. His teasing refusal to be drawn into an autumn election in 1978 brought laughs at the time.
Was I waiting at the church?
Afterwards, his decision was often credited with losing Labour the election. If Mrs Thatcher were to throw away the Tory lead now, she knows she wouldn't be forgiven by her party. Despite all the off-the-record briefing, she personally hasn't done much to damp down the speculation. As a result, the party is now geared up for a summer election. It'll be very difficult to stand it down, which is why the best bet is that she will announce a June election at this year's Scottish Tory conference.
Well, with us now is Britain's most experienced election watcher, Dr. David Butler from Nuffield College, Oxford. In your judgment, what is the principal feature of this latest poll?
The principal feature is that the Conservatives would win, but two things. One, volatility. It does show that people are moving around, and they've moved around very sharply in the last month, almost unprecedentedly sharply in the last 2 or 3 years. There's been nothing like this. And if they've moved 8% or 9% to the alliance in a month, 6 weeks, then they can go on moving even more, or it can all evaporate. Easy come, easy go. It's a very ephemeral situation. And if I was Mrs Thatcher, or any politician at the moment, I should be keeping my fingers crossed simply because things change. But there was one other thing in this poll, which is going to come out tomorrow, which hasn't been mentioned, and that is that the marginal seats are not behaving differently from the rest of the country. In 3 or 4 recent polls, it's been suggested that the Conservatives have an advantage because marginal seats are moving less away from them than other parts of the country. Now, in this poll, there is no significant difference between the nationwide findings and the findings in the Conservative Labour marginals. And in the Conservative Alliance marginals, there's been a massive slump in Labour support in the direction of the Alliance. So both of these things are reasons for Mrs Thatcher feeling queasy, and I certainly don't think that I shall be calling the election result, whatever the polls say at the moment of dissolution, when there's a month of campaigning and we know that the British electorate is more volatile than it's ever been.
And yet you heard your friend Robert Worcester there saying the Tories are given their best shot by the level pegging split of the two opposition parties. Is that your view too?
I think it's an advantage that the opposition parties are divided, but of course quite a lot. It's not really fair to say that the anti-Tory vote is divided, the anti-Labour vote is divided, the anti-Alliance vote is divided. All people are divided. We've got 3 parties. Things go in all directions. And I would have thought that if the Alliance wasn't there, quite a lot of the Alliance voters, a majority of them actually, I think prefer the Conservatives to Labour.
What is the principal comfort for Labour? After all, we know that they are capable now of polling significantly fewer votes than the Alliance and coming out with far more parliamentary seats. Is that sort of bedrock their best bet?
That is very much their advantage, that they could go down to 25% of the vote and the Alliance could be at 35%, and Labour would still have more seats than the Alliance because their vote is more effectively spread. The Alliance spread so thinly everywhere, they're likely to be missing by a rather narrow margin all over the country, whereas the Labour Party will be holding on to its bedrock seats easily.
And that's why Mr Kinnock was saying yesterday that only Labour can beat the Conservatives.
Yes, I think in this sense that Labour Party could win with, say, 38% of the vote, get a clear majority. The Alliance couldn't get a clear majority on much less than 42% of the vote. And I don't think anybody dreams in their wildest moments that the Alliance is going to get up to that level.
Now, not so long ago, one could talk of the Alliance having a distinctly bluish tinge to it. Why is it that it is now apparently inflicting the greatest damage on Labour?
Well, the Alliance has always been a wastebasket for people disillusioned from the other parties. They can, if you dislike the Labour Party, you don't want to go over to the Tories, you go to the Alliance. If if you dislike the Conservatives. The moment the Labour Party's run into a bad patch, its credibility has been under challenge for various reasons, the by-election, visit to Washington and other things. And if you're disillusioned, you want to express your dissatisfaction, you say, well, what about? Where can I go? And there's the alliance. It's the only alternative.
Do you have a view on who is benefiting most from all this speculation? We seem to have been having an election campaign now for the last 6 months.
Oh, I've no doubt at the moment the alliance is benefiting most, because the alliance is actually up there in with the main parties. It only started this parliament with 23 members, it's now got 28, but it still has been way back, out of the limelight. And now it's in the limelight, it's playing level pegging with the other parties, and though it hasn't got many MPs, it is getting sort of co-equal coverage on the radio. We're talking about it now, and this is good news for the alliance. The alliance needs to be noticed, needs to be taken as in the big league, and recent events have put it up in the big league, and it's quite good at playing with its publicity and keeping itself there if it can.
And yet, given that a lot of its support does appear to be soft, is it possible that the old two-party system could reassert itself?
Oh, completely possible. Now, I think the thing is wide open. My own feeling at the moment is you really have got a bedrock much lower than Bob Worcester suggested, a bedrock of, say, 25% for the Conservatives, 30% for the Conservatives, 25% for Labour, and probably now an alliance bridgehead of about 15%. And that leaves you with about 30% of people who could sway this way or that under the impact of the campaign.
And when is the election going to be?
Well, I am still an October man, but that's because I've got so hardened over many, many years at rumours of an early election. And I think people who are firmly in office are reluctant to take a gamble. So I suppose I'm an October man or even a 1988 man, but I must admit that I think the odds on June are considerably higher now than they were 2 or 3 weeks ago.
David Butler, thank you very much.